Welcome to Women's Wealth and Wellness Unleashed. I'm Laurie Falk, and together with my three powerhouse co-hosts and a slew of thought leaders and luminaries, we're bringing you a scintillating talk show style podcast that will disrupt the worlds of wealth and wellness as we know them today. We invite you to go on this journey with us as we offer you a paradigm shift that empowers you to change your approach to these key areas of your life. Join us and discover the truth that the future of wealth and wellness begins with you.
So welcome back to another episode of Women's Wealth and Wellness Unleashed. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that I want to know a lot more about. It's a topic that I hadn't even heard of probably until about 12 months ago. In the last episode, we talked about my friend who had gone through 14 years of annual colonoscopies because he had a family history of bowel cancer. And he had 13 years where the colonoscopies were clear. And then on the 14th colonoscopy, it was discovered he had stage 3 bowel cancer. About 6 months ago, I was listening to a Kate Northrup podcast where she talked about epigenetics. And it was a word I was very unfamiliar with other than hearing Laurie talking about it. So the fact that this episode was talking about that very subject, I turned up the volume. It had my attention. And the guest that Kate had on was talking about a lab experiment where mice were in a cage and they were introduced to the smell of Japanese cherry blossom, a beautiful smell. Almost immediately, they were then given an electric shock that left the mice screeching in agony. Now, the life cycle or the birth cycle of mice is very, very short. So those mice went on to have baby mice in very short muster, matter of weeks. And the baby mice were put into a cage and they were introduced to the Japanese cherry blossom smell. Nothing else, just that smell. And those same baby mice started screeching, huddling up together and shaking. Why was that? I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to let Laurie take over at this point and to give the answer, because that is what epigenetics is all about. So what happened there, Laurie? Explain to our listeners what that was all about.
Thank you, Lesley. You know, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and it started way back in my late 30s when I had that horrible dark night of the soul and crash that we talked about in the last episode. And I realized that I needed to go deeper and really have a thorough understanding of health and wellness. And it's not just, you have to excuse me, guys, I've got a little bit of a cold. Came back from DC safely, but with a cold. Anyway, I say that safely because there was just a crash in the Potomac last night. So nonetheless, epigenetics, think of it this way. All right. So we all know that we have this physical DNA that gets passed on generation after generation after generation. And forever we've heard about, well, if there's a family history of heart disease, your chances of getting heart disease, blah, 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 blah. But what people haven't understood up to this point is that we also have epigenetic emotional DNA that gets passed on generationally as well. That's a term that I've kind of coined. But what is epigenetics? Let's just dial it back a minute. We all think that these physical genes actually have the ability to develop into these diseases, but these genes don't have a brain and they can't turn themselves on or off. So Dr. Bruce Lipton when he was working at the University of Madison in Wisconsin, actually found by experiments in test tubes that it's not the physical DNA, it's the environment that the physical DNA is in, okay? So epi means above or around the gene. So the environment that those genes are floating in is what's going to influence them as to whether they turn on or lay dormant. So think about what impacts your physical DNA. Could be your diet, could be exercise, your thoughts, your emotions. There's so many things. So you have an experience and you have a thought, and that creates an emotion, and that emotion sets off a chemical reaction, which in turn can activate or not activate that DNA. So in a nutshell, that's the science of epigenetics. That's epigenetics for dummies. And I was thinking about this the other day, and seriously, I never took a science class ever. I was the English major. I just literally couldn't stand science. And it's a godsend today, because here I am studying these complex sciences, if you will, and I have such an uncanny ability to be able to just break it down so anybody can understand it, because I don't have any scientific background to try to put all those fancy words in there. So that's epigenetics. And the biggest piece of it, the biggest piece, is the emotions and the limiting beliefs and the subconscious programs that get passed on from our ancestors. And a number of us have these wonderful little Healy devices. And this beauty has a coaching module attached to it now. And what I have been able to do with that coaching module is otherworldly. I can literally have someone, a client, write an intention about what they want their life to look like in a specific area. I drop them out of their heads and into their hearts and let them feel what it's going to feel like when they actually have this new amazing accomplishment in their life. And then I run the Healy coaching module, and in 30 seconds, I will get a printout, an 8-page printout that will show me exactly what's preventing that person from achieving that goal. What's in the way? What's in the subconscious? Where did it come from? Is it from their parents? Is it from their grandparents? Is it from their ancestors? Is it karmic? Is it past life? It's crazy nuts and crazy accurate. And having been a coach for over 20 years, I can find in a 6-minute conversation what it used to take me 6 months without that device. So I bring that up because we have a tool to measure what I'm actually sharing with you. These patterns that served your parents or your grandparents or your great-grandparents, they lived in a different era. They lived in different times. So they might not have even been healthy for them back then, and they certainly aren't healthy for us here today. So it's really what brought it home the most for me. I studied with Bruce for a number of years, and what brought it home for me was when I saw a website called alternativecancercare.org. It's a site out of New Zealand. And when I looked up my mother's cancer, because she had breast cancer, she died when she was 49, and it was cancer of the left breast. And cancer of the left breast is different than the right breast and different than milk duct. I mean, there's like all these different, and that website literally lists the emotional root cause of these various types of cancer. And it was so spot on. Now I really had to dial it back. I was 16 when my mom was diagnosed. So I was 18 when she was diagnosed. I had to dial it back to 16, 18 months earlier to try to find what could have happened in her life that created this, but there was a conflict with the mother. And that was one of the big things, if you will, that would impact breast cancer of the left breast, was a conflict with the mother. And my mother found out that her parents got married 6 weeks before she was born. And she had always thought she wasn't loved and always thought she wasn't wanted. And that confirmed it. And I saw my mother just fall to pieces around that whole topic. So now here we are decades later, and I'm reading this and I'm like, well, there isn't any other science that could be more accurate than this. I mean, it just brought it home so solidly. So Lesley, when I hear this story about your friend, I mean, yeah, it's nice we have these screening tests, but for heaven's sakes, 14 years were wasted in not doing the personal growth work, in not cleaning up the subconscious, is not doing all the things that could have been done to shift the reactive patterns that would have ever turned that gene on in the first place. Yes.
Do you know? Yeah. And do you know what he thinks it's contributed to? So you say, your environment and, how you look after yourself. He attributes probably getting cancer to the fact he was drinking too much alcohol. So he was doing the tests, possibly knowing that he was leading himself down a particular route. He actually now thanks his cancer because he doesn't drink alcohol at all any longer.
And I'm guessing, Lesley, that was a family pattern as well.
I don't know. Possibly. I don't know. Well,
the reason I say that is my father had heart disease. His father had heart disease. His brothers had heart disease. So again, it was assumed, like your friend, it runs in the family. But with heart, I mean, what emotional patterns are associated with heart disease? This was a family of men that were emotionally completely shut down. Duh. What a coincidence. We didn't need to look too deeply into, some of the patterns in families of emotional patterns, the way they eat, and it's attributed to genetics when there's so many other behaviors and beliefs and family norms that support all of that. But the other thing I'm gleaning from this, and Laurie, when you were talking about the coaching module, that kind of brought it home for me, because in the story that Lesley was sharing about the mice and the blossoms, I'm not giving mice that much credit for, their intellectual processing capabilities or their emotional environment. What I heard from that story, Lesley, that you shared, is it was exactly like the experiment with Pavlov's dogs, where their nervous system got to associate the bell with the food, and this was the smell with the shock. But the thing that was amazing here is that that got inherited. That neurological thing got inherited without, I'm guessing, a lot of emotional component. So to me, that points to there's frequency built in here, and the coaching module, of course, is looking at all of that, of the energy signature of the things that we've incorporated. And I'm guessing that contributes to the explanation of how the second generation of mice had that reaction. Jenny, you look like a Cheshire cat. I mentioned frequency. I know you want to say something.
I love this topic, as does Laurie, but I wanted to break it down in a different way, because I understand it in a little bit of a different way. But it is, think about, we do start from one cell in the womb, okay, and then we keep multiplying cells. And so where is your one cell? Where is that first created? In your mother's womb, from your mother's cells, from all of that emotion. And, we do know now that as a woman, when you're developing in the womb, when you develop, like as women, we only have a set number of eggs, right, that we're born with. And so that develops when we're in the womb. So already me being like, I have a daughter now. So my daughter, Charlotte, she came from one of my eggs in my womb, which developed while I was in my mother. So my mother actually also carried Charlotte. So not to digress, but think about all of these women, and these emotions that are passed down. Those that information is never lost, right? It only grows to the cells. So, think about the body. We have trillions of cells in the body, and each cell has trillions of electrons. And every little electron has trillions of bits of information. So every single cell in our body is like a supercomputer, right? And so that's kind of how I like to think of it, is this is the information that's being passed. And so none of that information is ever lost, is just carried on. So, when you were talking about the Healy, and I know we're going to break down some of these tools that we use, but I did, just for the audience, just kind of wanted to say, so now with the technology that we have the ability to isolate electrons, and because every single cell gives off a very specific frequency. So we can record these frequencies from every single cell. So then as we're isolating these electrons, and they're giving off these certain frequencies, we can come up with this data bank of information to use in these kind of little mini computers, right? And so we're saving, just like your cell phone, just like your computer, all of these bits of information that then we can use these bits of information in the form of frequencies to then talk back directly to the cells. So we have this amazing ability to, help repattern thinking and repattern emotional, stagnations and this kind of thing by the use of frequencies. So, as we talk about these different tools, and as Laurie, if you're watching on YouTube and you're watching us as she's showing the Healy, I think, it's important to know that we have these capabilities, and it's all because this is going on inside of us, and we're recreating 800,000 cells per second. So coming from an emotional standpoint as well, if we have, so our DNA that's constantly being produced, there's only about 3% of that DNA that has its task already, of it's going to your hair, your skin type, different parts of your body, like that's already kind of written. And so we've got this like 97% that we can play with, that we have the ability to really affect our genes on this emotional level. So that's my tangent on that.
Laurie, I loved when you were sharing about not being a scientist, because that's another thing that we share that we never talked about. So subject for another conversation, but like you, I can talk about this, kind of break it down in English to people. So one of the things I'm getting from all of this, just really basic, because I also really didn't know much about epigenetics till I met Laurie. But what I'm hearing, just to make it simple, is as we know, we're not just physical beings. Our physical bodies are the densest representation of our being. From an Ayurvedic perspective, I have a lot to say about that. And so it makes sense, of course, that our genetics are not just physical. Duh. If we were only physical machines and only inheriting, our eye color and hair color from our parents, that would be a different universe. But we're not. We're multi-levered of consciousness and subconsciousness and frequency and soul beingness, depending on what your beliefs are. We have an etheric body and an astral body, and as Jenny's saying, those all store information. So
Yeah.
what we're kind of opening up here is that reality that we're not just physical, and everything else is going on, and everything else is contributing to our current reality. And we have so many more tools and potential to improve that reality than we've been told, that I think this is a truly disruptive concept. And Laurie, back to you, because you, how, I'm so grateful that you introduced me to this realm, because I, and probably many people listening today, haven't had a chance to have this really presented to them. You know, Lesley and I are still catching up.
You know, so was my doctor. I had a conversation with her one day about epigenetics, and you know, obviously she's a medical doctor and she's looking at my family history, and I said, all right, well, there's just a difference here because I study epigenetics and I've done my emotional healing work. And she said, you study what? She had never heard of it. And so she gets on the internet in the exam room and she types in epigenetics. She goes, it's a real science. I'm like, no, I made it up. I mean, really? Jesus Christ. So a year later, I go back to see her and she said, I'll have you know that I went to a medical conference and they had a half-day workshop on epigenetics and I took it because of you. So don't think that some of these things that we talk about on this show, just because your doctors don't know about it, doesn't mean they shouldn't. Okay. Just means
Or that they won't.
How is this landing, Lesley?
Well, do you know, it's made me be very aware of something, and it is something I've said for a while, but not necessarily in this context, because what lots of people will say to me is, how come my children, one of them is a saver, yet one of them is a big spender, and yet us in our family, you know, we've always been good savers. So what's happened there? And I will always say yes, but what was their grandfather like, or their great grandfather, which you probably don't know? But actually, it sounds to me from what you have said, Laurie, is that essentially your behaviors, your beliefs, your emotions, not just about your health and not just about, you know, who you believe you are, but also your relationship with money. How you behave with money can be passed down through your DNA, and your son might get his great, 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 great grandfather's behavior around money. And he just happened to be very, very frugal. Whereas your daughter could get her great, great grandmother, who happened to be a big lover of spending money. And so it's almost that nurture nature debate, because I can remember studying nurture nature at university and being fascinated by it. And people always saying, oh, you know, are your children, are they nature or are they nurture? Are they that way because you brought them up? Or actually, is it nature? Well, actually, what I didn't know, nature was absolutely talking about what we're talking about here. And I think it's only when you make that connection to actually, you know, as you said, Susan, it can be DNA, but why can't it also be other things? Why can't it be? Why does one person believe in God, but somebody else in their family doesn't? Very often we think that's purely down to the here and now and their beliefs in the here and now, rather than it being something more to do with epigenetics.
Lesley, I want to offer an example, and I'm offering this as hope for all of us, because we all come from families and there's histories in different families of different things. And in the fear-mongering society that we live in, many of us have taken that in from a place of concern. And sometimes it's justified, like your friend. You know, it's a good thing he had the colonoscopies. But I'm going to use myself as an example. I come from a family where there was, as I mentioned, cardiac disease. You know, my father had triple bypass when he was the age I am now. And most people would look at that with concern. I don't. Couple of reasons. My father was an emotionally stunted person. I'm not. There's, you know, completely different emotional soup that we live in. And then from another perspective, and I'll just mention this, maybe we'll touch on it in another episode, but one of the things that I've studied and become certified in and all of that is the blood type science. I studied with the Eat Right for Your Type doctor. And my father and I happen to be a rare blood type. We're B blood type, only 10% of the population. And one of the interesting things about Bs is we tend to be one of the healthiest blood type, but we're very sensitive to certain foods that are not good for us, even though they may be good for other people. And the top of that list is chicken. And my father was told many years ago that chicken was healthier than meat, right? Many people have been told that.
Yeah.
And so he almost never ate meat again, and he ate chicken all the time. And when I stopped eating chicken, I saw such a dramatic change in my physiology. And that was over about a quarter of a century ago. I haven't eaten chicken since. And I attribute a lot of my well-being to the fact that I know how harmful that is to me. My father was committed to it. So I wouldn't, that's a little example. And it's going to be different for everybody and probably every family. But I wouldn't expect to have any outcome like his. Not for physical reasons, not for emotional reasons, not for spiritual reasons. And obviously I do have his DNA. But the thing about knowing about some of these quote unquote risks, I think of them as seeds that we want to make sure to not water. We've all got seeds that we don't want to water. And I think that's a really good image to hold. You know, if you have that in your family, it pays to be aware of what might contribute to that and make the choice not to do those things, not to go down that path, or to do the clearing and healing and stuff that Laurie's talking about.
100%.
Really.
100%. I mean, here's the thing that most people do not understand. They think that the cognitive mind is controlling everything. If I were to draw a big circle on the page, this big, and tell you that circle represents the subconscious mind. If I put a pin dot in the center, that's your conscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
So the size difference between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is enormous, enormous. And what most people don't understand is that 90 to 98% of the time, we are reacting based upon subconscious programs. We are not consciously deciding what we're going to do in every single moment of every single day. 90 to 98% of the time, it's reactive behavior. So as far as I'm concerned, doing your personal growth work, doing your clearing work, working with a coach, not optional. It's essential, because if you don't clean that up, that little monkey brain is running the show and all your ancestors are running your life. Are you kidding me?
No, there's an image. No, there is an image.
I'm just
all
saying.
your ancestors running around.
It's also, you know, our last episode about the ROI of wellness. It's another context on why to invest in that personal growth, because there are things that could bite us in the ass. Just being blunt, there are. And
Absolutely.
I feel like I'm, you know, aware of some of it. I just, you know, offered an example, but you know, my conscious mind is probably only aware of that tiny little bit.
And I think in a way of wrapping up, it'd be really useful, Laurie, for you to, for people who are like me and, you know, very new to this area, that it's starting to make a lot of logical sense, everything that you're saying. What can we specifically start to do to utilize this knowledge and to make of it something more tangible? Because for me, my awareness has been over a process of starting about 12 months ago, but I'm still very much the novice. What can you offer up as a way of utilizing what you know in a way that the less knowledgeable of us can start to benefit from?
Good one.
Putting you on the spot.
There's, you know, the answer is going to be different for each individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because individual is going to be reacting differently to different learning tools. I would say, if you find yourself in a situation and you're reacting to the situation in a way that doesn't even make sense. Like, I don't even understand, like, why would that upset me so much? That's not something that would normally upset me. If it's upsetting you, it's probably, and it's probably not you. It's probably a subconscious program. It's probably a block. It's probably a limiting belief. It's probably something that got passed on generationally, which is why you're questioning the feelings in the first place. So I think you need to be very, very, very aware of what your triggers are. And I'm going to just encourage our audience. I love talking about this. So ask me questions. Flood me with questions. Let me help you individually, because honestly, it's going to be different for everybody. What triggers you, Lesley, is going to be different than what triggers Susan and Jenny and myself. And so that's a really good tip. Another one is, if you find yourself worrying, switch that W word to wondering. They're both W words. They both are asking questions about the future, predicting the future. Worrying comes from a place of fear, a fearful approach to the future, versus wondering, I wonder what possibly could happen. I wonder how this is going to magically turn around. I wonder how I'll get invited to an inaugural ball in my lifetime. I'm just like picking stuff out of the sky, right? Because that just happened to me. It was never on my bucket list even, and it was quite an experience. But we live in this magical universe of potentials and possibilities, and we don't want to be tied down by those fears and old beliefs and old patterns that stopped our ancestors. So just move from worrying to wondering.
Yeah.
Lesley, your question sparked something for me, and this is just from a perspective of common sense, not any epigenetic wisdom. But as an obvious thing, we often benefit from support when we're exploring difficult issues. And just as something obvious here, if we're seeking support, it makes more sense to seek support from somebody who has this broader perspective to hold our experience in. I had very good experiences earlier in my life with psychotherapy, for example. I feel that, what's going on for me now is broader than that. And so I engage with practitioners and healers like Laurie, like myself, that are looking at really more what's going on in my soul perspective, because that's how I experience myself. So I think that's something else I would say, is that if you're seeking answers, to broaden, the inquiry and the support for people who actually have some understanding of these things. So that's
Absolutely.
just
I think it's good to also note and to remember that, things that happen. I was told this kind of image by a mentor of mine who actually works very closely with Laurie. They do a Monday Night Magic together. His name's Ken Close. So several years ago, and she does that once a month. If you want to check that out, it's very
every
amazing.
Monday of the month. It's awesome.
It's all about epigenetics. But and so Ken told me, we were having this same conversation, and he told me, okay, when you look at your life, think about, an inverted pyramid. Okay, the points at the bottom. And so we start with one cell. That's like building blocks, right? For our life, who we are, what's happened in our lives. And we start with the one cell, and as we go along and we're building this inverted pyramid and all of these cells, and they're growing, things happen along the way. And these are our traumas, these are our triggers. Okay. And so now as an adult, and we're trying to kind of face these things and say, well, why am I triggered by this? What's going on? And as we're seeking out this, help, if you will, or this counsel, or whatever it is, in whatever form that you want to kind of address these issues, I think it's important to remember that we can never remove those bricks of our pyramid, because then what happens? It all falls apart, right? So think about it in a way too, that as we change our perspective on these triggers and traumas and things that have happened, that is how we then grow, is because we're no longer triggered, because we've actually changed the perspective on what has happened, and we can utilize that then as wisdom, right? That then becomes our wisdom, and how we can then teach others and manifest things in our life. So I thought that was really profound, and we were talking about it in the sense of using frequencies and the Healy as a tool, is because using these frequencies really allow us to make those changes quite rapidly and very effectively, as we're and everyone, again, you have to kind of meet people where they're at, but sometimes it takes a little bit longer in other realms. So I just wanted to offer that too. I think it's just a change of perspective. It's kind of like grief, your grief never goes away. It's just a different way that you're expressing love for a lost one or something that that happened. So I think if we can change that perspective, then we can really see growth.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a way of wrapping up this episode, I think what we've demonstrated today is, part of the reason why we started this podcast was to be curious and to encourage curiosity in our audience. And I think, as a reminder of what Laurie said, we need to have that awareness. We need to understand what is triggering us and make a decision. Are we going to accept it or do something about it? And to not worry, to want to be more wondering about what the possibilities are for us. Because in this life, there are so many possibilities when we choose to be wondrous about things rather than worrying about them. So thank you for joining us on today's episode of Women's Wealth and Wellness Unleashed. We will be back again next week, and we look forward to talking to you then. And actually, before we go, one final reminder. In the show notes, there will be details on how you can access Monday Magic with Laurie and with Ken, so that you have the opportunity to hear far more on this brilliant subject. Until then, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Women's Wealth and Wellness Unleashed, where we empower women to take control of the two most important areas of their life, their health and their wealth. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with another amazing woman who's ready to elevate her wealth and wellness journey. Stay connected with us by heading to our website and joining our Facebook community. All the details can be found in the show notes. Until next time, keep thriving and unleashing your highest potential.